for the Susan Taylor Podcast, where we discuss the yoga of mind, medicine, and healing. Author of Feeling Good Matters, Sexual Radiance, and the Vital Energy Program, Dr. Taylor imparts authentic knowledge and practical tools that inspire, educate, and empower us to be a healing force for positive change. So join us and take your life and our planet to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Podcast 43. Can nutrients affect your resilience? Is it possible that a lack of adequate nutrients for our brain leaves us more vulnerable? And what role does nutrients play in our resilience? Today I'd like to discuss concepts that can answer these two questions, including some of what the research will tell us. I'm a trained nutritional biochemist, and I like to find the connection between the increase in mental health challenges and actually the decrease in the nutritional value of the foods that we're eating. And this whole idea is very troubling to me at this time. Particularly, foods are being marketed specifically for pregnancy, women, children, and it will have an effect down the pipeline. So is it possible that a lack of adequate nutrients for our brains is really causing our mental health issues? Basically, how we feel, how we think, how we respond to our environment. Research is showing that it actually is, and it points to a critical need to pay attention to this. It's not as if there's an absence of research on the topic. Worldwide, there have been approximately 45 to 50 peer-reviewed clinical studies showing that diet and supplementary nutrients impact our mental health and resilience, for that matter. And it's interesting that prior to the current psychopharmacology revolution that began in the 1960s and 1970s, it was common knowledge that an imperfect nutrition or imperfect diet caused mental issues leading to what is termed mental illness. But in the last 50 years, we've been led to believe that there's a magic bullet for everything, and we've become this medication-oriented society. And nowhere is it more apparent than what we see in mental health right now. The reason why I'm bringing this up, I just met some wonderful, wonderful people. I was doing some training on resilience in California, and everyone was really wonderful, but what was missing in my whole talk, I worked with meditation and the mind, but what was missing is the nutrient aspect of it. What's happening in our gut? What's happening in our brain? And so some of you have absolutely reached out and said, hey, can you just include something with that? And that's the cause of this topic today and the subject matter for which I'm talking about. So the question is there a need for more studies to really prove that nutrients are needed for mental health or for keeping our resilience? Looking at resilience as the ability to bounce back, not getting stressed, no anxiety, no depression, no post-traumatic stress disorder. All of those contribute to having the resilience in life or not having the resilience in life. So as I said, is there a need for more studies? Well, I'd like to say no. It's obvious that if we feed junk to the brain and mind, you get a pile of junk back. Does anyone really need a study to show that? That polluted food produces a polluted mind? Because the mind and body are one, so whatever we feed the body goes into our consciousness, and whatever we feed our consciousness by way of thoughts, feelings, even actions, manifests in the body. The mind and body are one, and that's what I keep bringing back and emphasize. But since we're a study-needed society, our study feeds off of studies, research studies, we need to have those studies to tell us that overeating is not good. I laugh at that. I mean, isn't it obvious that if we eat too much, we're going to be unhealthy? We don't need a study to tell us that, but our society requires studies. So I suppose we do need more studies because the body of the placebo-controlled trials is still very small to what is needed to really shift what we call the clinical practice for what physicians and practitioners are actually telling patients. So studies are needed. When we have to shift clinical practice, that means people who are prescribing pills for common GI complaints, for example, for overeating, we need to have a clinical trial for that. But I am sad to report that to make this change it is based on economics, and that's the sadness of it. It's really not based necessarily on the health. It's on the economics of what's happening. And it's the economics of the manufacturers as well as those prescribing. So let's not drift off from the medical business that we have, but what I'm trying to say is we need clinical trials to really support that nutrient-based, or without nutrients, we're going to have mental illness, lack of resilience, meaning anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, distraction disturbances, irritability. All of those are a mental issue and, of course, a physical issue because the mind and body are one. One leading researcher who I've come across is Dr. Bonnie Kaplan, and she advocates she's the nutrition and mental health person, and that's her advocate. That's what she spends her time doing. And her latest published research, which I just reviewed, was a randomized trial of nutrient supplements to minimize psychological stress. And she's doing it after a natural disaster. And it was quite informative, and I'm going to apply this to the resilience factor or resilience in what we're talking about, because a natural disaster is anything, it's a disaster, but some people have disasters at their work environment according to in their own state of mind. The paper states that scientific reports, they accumulated scientific reports for the past 15 years, and they showed that it had a dramatic restoration of good mental health in people who consumed broad-spectrum formulas of micronutrients, mostly minerals and vitamins. I'm not even talking on this podcast about herbs that we can use. That's in an upcoming podcast on herbs for resilience. She says that initially these results were surprising because the prior century of research had shown very modest improvements with nutrient treatments. But there was a key difference in the studies, and the older research consisted of studies of single nutrients, and the modern research studied formulas with multiple nutrients. The tremendous advantage of broad-spectrum formulas is that they represent what the brain actually needs. All dietary minerals and vitamins on a daily basis and in proper balance are what the brain needs. So what I'm getting at, let me just review this. The studies that showed that things didn't work were single nutrients. The studies that showed it did work for mental health and resilience were the study that used broad spectrum vitamins and minerals. Unfortunately, it's primarily the single nutrient treatment studies that receive the government funding, and that's what's happening. And in part because they appeal to our Western way of thinking. We're in a very reductionist model of the silver bullet for every problem. You know, we have antibiotics for a specific infection, or vitamin D for depression, vitamin D for menopause, vitamin D for cancer. I mean, the list goes on. One supplement is going to solve all the problems. That's not the case. Again, that's a reductionist way. Even when we manufacture certain supplements, they pull out the active ingredient, thinking that that's going to be the magic bullet, when in fact studies have shown that the whole herb working synergistically works on building resilience of the mind, I'm talking, in the body, with less anxiety, less depression, more cognitive ability. It's obvious, and the studies can prove this. But humans need many, perhaps at least 50 micronutrients for optimal brain function. So that's why we need these multivitamin formulas. I've had a lot of people that I've come across in my client base say, well, I do take the B vitamins, I take B12. B12, again, is a single vitamin. The B complex is composed of all the B vitamins, B1, B2, B6, B12, niacin, folic acid's in there. All of those give more of a synergistic blend and working with the cofactors in the brain, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we know that humans need at least 50 micronutrients for optimal brain function. And we're talking about the biochemistry that happens in the brain to make fats, to make amino acids for our neurotransmission to take place. So I'd always say, why would anyone expect a single nutrient in these research studies to have a significant impact on complex brain function? At best, single nutrients appear to boost the impact of medications, but our goal is really to restore normal brain function and to build resilience. And this achievement requires a broad spectrum of nutrients. So keep that in mind if you walk away with anything. If we put the false prophets, PROFITS, aside, we see that we need to build our scientific knowledge around the treatment of mental health problems with formulas containing multiple micronutrients. That's it in a nutshell. There have been two significant obstacles up to this point, and again, we've already mentioned it, the excessive influence of pharmaceutical companies, which spend billions of dollars on clinical trials but will not support nutrient treatment trials because guess what? They won't benefit financially. And second, the bias of conventional funding sources, I hate to say mostly government agencies, towards supporting clinical trials of single nutrients still exists. These two obstacles have prevented the flow of funds to support research on multi-nutrient treatments, even though these are treatments, the treatments have been shown to have great benefit for mental health. It's logical to consider that enhancing people's intake of minerals and vitamins, micronutrients, think of them as the micronutrients, might be helpful for coping with stress and helping build resilience, especially those that suffer from PTSD, as it has been known for centuries that a good diet and a good gut microbiome can help optimize health and well-being, and especially mental health. For example, we know that micronutrients act as cofactors in neurotransmission, and I just mentioned that, synthesis and metabolism, where they become the rate-limiting factors, which means if there's not enough of them, we don't make or synthesize or metabolize our amino acids. And that's what allows us to either be awake, asleep, relaxed, less anxiety, more alive, less depressed. That's what we're talking about here. There have been at least 7 randomized controlled trials for using the B complex. That's one of my favorites because they're also methylators, which is in a previous podcast, combined mineral vitamin formulations in which improvements were shown in depression, anxiety, stress. It's already been demonstrated. Although not all trials use broad-spectrum micronutrients, so then they haven't shown benefit for changing mood and anxiety, we know that when we do use broad-spectrum micronutrients, there is an improvement. And we know that. That's why the trials have been negative, because also trials are negative when they don't use people that have any issues. You can't use a healthy population and say, hey, do you feel more healthy? You know, a recent meta-analysis showed a small but meaningful effect of micronutrients on stress and anxiety, but not on mood. It just depends how the studies are set up. That's why I'm not really a proponent of studies. My study is, how do you feel? And if you feel great, well, keep doing what you're doing. And if you don't, change it. Again, does it really take into account all of this work that we're talking about? Take a clinical research trial to figure this out? I would say no. If it feels right to you, go with it. B vitamins, as we said, are methylators as well as cofactors in generating the necessary neurotransmitters to bring health to the mind and brain. In fact, I tell everyone to include a B vitamin capsule, not tablet, in their dietary regimen each day. It's an important component of any diet, and it's not that I'm talking, as I mentioned, about just B12. I have to emphasize that. We want a full spectrum so that they work synergistically. Also, keep in mind the brand is very important. They're not all created equal. So what can we take from this? Although resilience starts in the mind, and that's what I was teaching, we also have a body, and the mind and body are one. It's crucial that the dietary macronutrients are the fats, the carbohydrates, the proteins. Let me see if I got them all here. Fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Yeah, they're the macronutrients. And the micronutrients, which are the vitamins and minerals, and they're supplied in our living soil through the plants that we take in and we eat. But if the soil's devoid of these nutrients, then the plants can't make the amino acid in their Shikimate pathway, as I mentioned before. It doesn't help the plant thrive. When the plant doesn't thrive, we don't thrive. As I discussed this last week with regenerative farming and that podcast, I spoke about the Shikimate pathway and how the soil is crucial in how the vegetables are grown or anything in the soil in giving us the nutrients that we need for our fruits and vegetables. In fact, there are studies to even show that there's been a a great decline in the nutrients that are available in our vegetables as well as our fruits over the last decade. What I would suggest is evaluate your present condition. And resilience we're defining as feeling vital, strong, both physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And if you don't, then address that and say, well, how can I feel good? Find out why you might not feel good. Check your diet. There's only so long you can go without addressing your nutrient intake. Now it's more critical and crucial since our food chain has been compromised with overuse of chemicals and genetically modified organisms. We already see the issues arising, and we see it in the kids. We have the power within ourselves to heal. Of course we do, but we must change what we're doing now. We also have the power with our dollars and intelligent, because we do have the intelligence, all of us do, and we have the ability through our dollars to change what's really happening. So I say, pay attention and be aware of your health, your family, and your community. And that brings me to the end of this episode. Contact me at susantaylor.org if you'd like me to talk about something for the week, and if you have any questions or comments or even feedback. I'd like to thank you for listening. The Susan Taylor podcast does come out every week. And again, any of your comments I read personally, and I'd like to incorporate them into the podcast. Thank you to the several out there that asked me to talk about the B vitamins and what we need to really have a resilient and healthy mind. And until next time, remain calm, consciously aware, living in the moment. Thank you, everyone, for listening.